What's up everybody? DJ Chance here. Now today I'm going to be doing a comparison video between this, the Pioneer DDJ Rev1, and this, the Pioneer DDJ SB3. Let's get into it. Alright, first off I'm going to begin with the very first thing that I personally notice when I look at this controller, and that is the size of the jog wheels. As you can see, the jog wheels on the Rev1 are much bigger than the jog wheels that you have on the SB3. Now in the press material from Pioneer, they said that the Rev1's jog wheels were going to be the same size as the DDJ SR2's jog wheels, which in a previous video I thought maybe it was the same size wheels that was on the SX series, but I was wrong there. The SR2 has a 149mm jog wheel, and the Pioneer DDJ SX series has a 132.5mm jog wheel. So there is a slight difference in between the jog wheel size. The other thing with the jog wheels is that it's also higher up off the control surface than on the SB3. Let's see what we have here. So it looks like off the deck, this thing is about 9/16 of an inch. And this one looks like it's about 12/16 of an inch. So you've got about 3/16 of an inch of height difference between the SB3 and the Rev1. That being said, the next thing you're going to notice when you look at this controller is the layouts. Now, the SX series pretty much introduced the layout that we see here, and it was copied by every manufacturer there was, pretty much took the same layout and added it to their controllers. So going along with Pioneer's new tagline of Join the Revolution for their Rev1 and Rev7 series, it is also a revolutionary new design that we have for a DJ controller. Immediately you'll notice that the mixer section looks a lot like the DJ MS series of DJ mixers by Pioneer. Other than the layout in the mixer section and the bigger jog wheels, the most notable thing is the way that the setup is for the deck itself. They've actually made the turntable portion look like they were turned 90 degrees. Now, I know a lot of people refer to this as battle style, but when I came up in the 80s, this was known as Philly style. And I first remember seeing it with DJ Bobcat in the LL Cool J I'm Bad video. He had the turntables twisted sideways, and I thought that was the most amazing thing I had ever seen, which comes in second after actually seeing a set of Technique 1200s from Mixmaster Ice from UTFO. So what they've done is they've given you the pitch control up here where it would be had you turn the turntable sideways, instead of going up and down like has been on controllers pretty much since the advent of controllers. I can also mention the pitch control lengths between the two controllers. You have a 50mm or 2-inch pitch control, and on the brand new Rev1 you have a 60mm. So you got an extra 10mm of play to play with, which translate to a much better, more precise mix when you're moving the pitch control. Now, I was never really a fan of the pitch control being up on top here, because you always kind of had to reach over the arm when you had a turntable, and if you were standing at certain positions, sometimes the arm would be blocking the pitch control view, so you kind of had to stand right over the turntable like you were a helicopter and just kind of hover over it to get that nice precise mix. And that was true because I did a lot of what's called now open format. You know, if you were strictly a battle DJ, this didn't really matter because you were probably throwing the pitch control to a lower pitch and a higher pitch, kind of like the same way a piano or a xylophone or anything like that is set up. You know, you have your lower notes on this end, higher notes on this end. So it made sense from an instrument purpose when you were using the turntable that this would follow the same kind of design with pitch as it does with the keys on a piano. If you're doing just beat matching, I never liked that this was up here. I only dealt with it because that was the best way to do scratching and have the arms out of the way. You never had to worry about the arm being bumped with your hands. When you crossed over this way, the arm would be here and you had the risk of actually hitting that. So with it out of the way was really great. But I never cared for the pitch control being up top of there, but I was never much of a battle DJ. And I used to be a judge for the Guitar Center battles, but I never really cared for it. The only turntable I really liked over the past maybe 25 years, other than a 1200, that gave me everything that I was looking for at the time with having a pitch control here, was the Newmark TTX turntable. You were able to move the pitch control from there to right here, because they had like a display screen and the 45 and 33 buttons there, but you could actually switch the positions. And I loved that turntable. I absolutely adored the layout of the TTX. They are detented pitch controls. The SB3 has a very prominent pitch control click when you reach that 0. I mean, when you go there, you can hear it. I'm just going to stay quiet for a second. You're going to hear that click. You hear that when you're going past it? You can hear the click. On this new one, they've made it smoother. There's still a detent, but not as pronounced. You see how much lower that is? It's very smooth. And when you're transitioning out of that 0 to the very next pitch percentage, that's a really good thing to have. The other biggest difference, I mean, it's the mixer section. They've given you a wider mixer section. Now you've got like an extra, I think it's 1.75 inches between your decks. So now instead of having them so close together where you're trying to scratch and everything's very tight, you've got a little more space for your hands to fly across the deck and hit a button on your way. You can do your cues as you're scratching and doing your thing, you know? Other things of note on here that are different between the two, the buttons that they've used on this controller, let's say for the effects section, are definitely different. I mean, you can see here you've got these really tiny buttons for your effects. And on the SB, you have much bigger buttons. With the browse button, they're both different. You've got a really tiny browse button that you have on the DDJ SB3. It's a very narrow button. And then the one on the Rev1 is much wider and taller off of the base. The knob on the Rev1 is more satisfying because it has more girth. I mean, seriously, isn't that what everyone wants? The rest of the buttons on here are pretty much the same. They probably use the same exact buttons from the same exact manufacturer. They feel exactly the same. They click exactly in the same way. Now, the SB3 had a key lock and tempo range button. They did away with that key lock button on here, which makes sense because if you're using this more as a turntablist, you don't need your keys locked, especially if you're doing tone play with the pitch control. You don't want to hit your key lock by accident and you're actually trying to play a tune with the pitch control. Now you can't if you hit that key lock. The tempo range now on the Rev1 is actually the 3 and the 4 button. They've given you 3 abilities with this one button now. Now the buttons that they had above the turntable on the SB3 are pretty much the same buttons they're now using for the auto loop feature, the reloop exit, and the sync button. The sync button is up out of the way, but it is near the pitch control, so that is actually pretty cool. I mean, if you're growing up that way and you kind of hit it by accident, you can turn it off pretty quickly. Instead of having the sync button all the way down here near the cue and play, now it's in a place where it makes a little bit more sense. In case you hit it by accident, immediately you'll see it and turn it off because you're trying to control your pitch. So that's really smart that they put the sync near the pitch instead of the sync down here, where if you hit it and you don't notice it and your hand is over here, you're kind of covering that. You know, in the middle of a gig, and even if you're scratching, the sync button's kind of right underneath your fingers here. So you don't see it until you start to move it or you hear it in your ear, you hear that you're in sync and you're like, oh my God. Talking about the auto loop, you'll see down in the SB3, they had the auto loop section right next to the pads, and obviously they had to move that to make this more battle-friendly style. So they did the auto loop up here above the deck, and they've given the in and out and the reloop. They moved it from these buttons here to up on top here. Now the buttons for the half beat controls and for the double beat controls and the in and out, if you're doing a loop, are a lot smaller than the ones that were on the SB3. But that's to be expected because they did that as well with the effects buttons. The mixer section is, of course, what everybody wants to talk about. What's interesting to me is the attention to detail they played with this particular mixer section. If you take a look on the SB3, you'll see how you have these 5 buttons in a row for each channel because you have a 3-band EQ, you've got your trim and your filter knob. So in the graphics on the SB3, they wrote EQ right where the 3 EQ buttons are. So when you look, you can see that you're in the EQ section. But because they've separated the buttons from being on top of each other, they did away with the graphic that says EQ because now you should know that these 3 buttons are your EQ and the ones to the side are now your filter and trim. So that's just an interesting little thing that they thought of to eliminate that, because they figured we don't need it now. People will know. And of course, you have your effects section with the paddle switches. Now, the paddle switches I've always liked, and it surprised me that Pioneer took so long to use them. This was exactly how you used to access the effects in the EFX 500 and the EFX 1000 20 years ago. And the fact that it has been missing for so long has always surprised me, because I always loved the way the EFX 500 worked, because you could just slap that. And it's surprising to me that Pioneer took almost 2 decades to reintroduce that switch that worked so well back then on a piece that was so popular. So having these back is a nice welcome feature. It's much better than having to hit the buttons for effects as you did on the old mixer section and just controlling the volume, you know, because you'd had to actually twist. And if you're doing really fast mixes and you've got hundredths of a second to move your finger, this definitely can shave that off, especially if you're in a battle type of mode. The preciseness of your mix could be interfered with by having that extra millisecond that you're off by hitting a switch. And having that there on the way when you're going back and forth, you know, you come back and hit that, you come back and hit that, come back and hit that, come back and hit that. So having it up in a familiar place is really good to have, especially for a battle type layout. That's exactly what you want. Because in a battle type setup with this controller, I'm going to be doing something completely different. I'd have to scratch and turn that, and then I'd have to come here and try to scratch and do that, and I always have to keep my hands here, and that's much harder to do. This is a much more natural feel when you're going up. You can just slap it down, slap it down. Even the font is the same. They've used the same exact font, so Pioneer definitely saved some money there. Now, the all-important performance pads, they're much smaller than they are in the SB3. They have definitely taken advantage of the available real estate for the turntable and the pitch control. They've given you teeny tiny buttons. They're similar to what you had on the Rain. They're not backlit into RGB colors. They're only backlit in this amber color, which I find pleasing with the gold version, or the N version as it's called by Pioneer. I don't know what the N stands for. I don't know why N means gold. If you go back to the beginning of Pioneer's limited or gold versions, they all had that N as a suffix. I don't know what the N stands for. I don't know if it means gold in some language. I know it's not from the periodic table, because that would be AU, so I have no idea what the N is. Maybe it's for none of your business, or no, we'll never tell you what it means. I don't know. And also on the SB3, you didn't have RGB pads either. They only kept it in this red. And I like the yellow. I kind of wish that the SB3 had the backlit yellow pads too, because that would have made this a lot more attractive, even though it is an attractive little controller with the all gold wheels. The thing that always bothered me with the SB3 though, is that they put these silver little markings on the gold version of this turntable. If you look at the SB3, there's nothing silver on this controller anywhere except for the USB port and the RCA output. I never understood why they chose to put silver in the middle of this platter. I feel like those should have been gold. I mean, it's a gold version. But they put so much gold on the turntable, I guess they figured, no one's going to care. They made up for it for the design of the Rev1. I really like the way this wheel looks. I think they put just the right amount of gold for this size controller. It's kind of sexy the way it looks, with the lines that make it look like record grooves. They made the gold part look like a label. They've given you a marker, which of course is only there for show. The marker is actually useless when you're playing in a live environment. That marker is kind of there as an emphasis that this is a battle-focused DJ controller. Other things that they did away with from the SB3 to the new Rev1 is that they've changed what the performance pads can do. They kept the hot cue where it's always been, which is a great thing. I'm glad they didn't change that. They changed the FX fade that you had on the SB3, which was a pretty handy feature actually for transitions and mixing. And now they've given you an auto loop function. But again, that goes in line with what these controllers were meant to do. When you're doing just kind of mixing, you know, you're doing beat matching and transitions, the FX fade is much more useful to you than if you were doing battle kind of performance, the loop, auto loop would be more useful to you in this section because you'd want your beat to loop that you're using for scratching. Maybe you're juggling, or the funk as it was originally called. It wasn't called beat juggling in the beginning.
There was Jack.
They've kept the roll underneath. They've kept the beat jump underneath. Now the pad scratch button, they've introduced something new on this controller that you didn't have on a controller before, which is the tracking function. They've kept the sampler exactly where it is, and again, those buttons up above the performance pads are the same width as the buttons on here, but smaller than they were on the original SB3. So that's just something of note to look out for as well. The up faders and the crossfader are pretty much the same. They feel exactly the same to me. I know they are the same exact switches, and they feel like they have the exact same kind of resistance. I don't know about longevity, but they feel exactly the same. The crossfader feels exactly the same. The other thing that they've changed from the SB3 to this new Rev1 controller, the LED lights are different. They've given you one little panel, one window that has the 5 LEDs in the VU section. They've given you 5 LEDs on the Rev1 too, but they've given one to each side of your headphone area. So now instead of them being in between the up faders, now you have them right next to each respective up fader for each respective turntable. You've got that separation now between the two, which is handy when you're in battle mode as well, I think, if you're using headphones, because if you have these lit, let's say, you know exactly what side you're listening to next to the VU meter. So that's pretty handy. You didn't, it wasn't really rocket science to begin with. I mean, you had them just above the VU meter. So if you were on channel 1 on an SB, right above it, it says 1. And right above channel 2, you have the 2. But now having it on each side, I think visually is going to be easier for someone to see because it's right in the line of where you're actually looking. A lot of DJs are focusing on their actual faders. They're not really looking at all the other features in the buttons like you would have in just club style layout versus your battle style layout. They kept the exact same buttons and graphics for the master and 1 and 2 in the headphones. They've done away with the sync button down here, as I mentioned earlier. They've now put it out of the way, and they've just given you the world's smallest Q button. It's even smaller than you would find like on a DJ To Go 2 by Newmark. I mean, the sync and Q buttons on here are massive. I mean, look at that. If you put them side by side, I mean, that's a big difference in button size, and these were already really tiny. Well, the pads on here are slightly smaller. You know what? I think they're the same exact width on the DJ To Go 2 Touch, but they're rectangles, so they're not the same depth. Other changes they did graphically was they took away the ring that goes around the play and pause. They kind of set, I guess they figured, all right, if you're in this battle configuration, this is always going to be the play and pause button. But they didn't give you any graphics to indicate that, which is a weird choice because they sure as hell made the logo on here very big. They want to make sure that this was in bold. It's like when you're doing an email and you click the font to bold. I mean, this is normal, regular font. I mean, this will be, Times Roman, and this is like Times Roman bold. They really want you to know what you're playing on. But they don't want you to know about your play and pause button. That, you should know what it is by now. If you don't, get out of here, kid, you bother me.
Get out of here, you bother me.
Now, the play and pause button is exactly the same as what you found on the outgoing SB3 model. Now, the layout on the rear of these controllers is almost the same. So on the Rev1 now, it just says mic and master. You don't get that little rectangle around it accentuating what it is. USB is exactly the same. Another thing I find interesting that they changed is where the cable lock port is. I would have figured they would have done the same thing by putting the cable port in the middle, but they put it off to the side. Not necessarily is it better or not, but it's just, I find it interesting that they made the choice to do that. They moved the cable lock from the middle, which was right above the pitch in the SB3, to now it's over to the side, which ironically is actually still above the pitch. Okay. Now size-wise, Rev1 is longer in width. I believe it's 21 inches, but the SB3 is deeper from top to bottom. The other difference on the rear is if you look at the back, you'll see that it's rounded out in the corners. Very slight. If you're looking at it, you may think it's completely rectangle. But when you're looking at the SB3, you can see how sharp the corner is in comparison. The other differences with the rear is that they've made their company name rear and center. They put Pioneer DJ right in the middle, not Serato. So this is much better for their branding, because if you're looking at this from a crowd standpoint, you're seeing Pioneer DJ right there in the middle center. Get Serato's off to the side. The texture that's around the rear edges here is not in the middle section between them. You'll see that it's a smoother surface in between the rougher edges on the outsides of the back of the SB3, but they did away with that on the Rev1. They just made it an all matte surface in the back. It doesn't look like it's a separated piece like it does on the SB3. Underneath, the controllers are pretty similar as well. They've used the same exact feet in the corners, so you get a non-slip surface on your table. They're exactly the same height, same width. You've got the cutouts on the sides just like you do on the SB3, but again, they're larger. You can see that the cutouts on the SB3 kind of end right here, a full finger width for me in size difference.
Don't concentrate on the finger or you will miss all that heavenly glory.
They also made the raised surface for when you pick up the controller. You have some grip here when you pick it up. They made it smooth on the SB3, but on the Pioneer DDJ Rev1, it's the same as the rest of the surrounding area, which is better to me because this is slippery. When you touch it, you can feel how slick this is, but here you've got much more friction, so you're less likely to drop this on the ground, which is nice attention to detail. I like that they thought of that because there definitely is a difference when you touch it. It's not something you notice right away, and it's probably something most people are never going to notice unless they watch this video, but that's just something to think about. Nice attention to detail there. And both controllers use the same amount of power. They're both 5 volts, powered by the USB, and 500 milliamps. I'm glad that that's not changed because Newmark is all over the place when it comes to that. Some of their controllers are half an amp, and then it's an amp for this same size, but like the Platinum Effects, the Mixtrack Platinum Effects is a half an amp, even though it's bigger and has more lights, more features, so I don't know what Newmark's doing there. And Pioneer made their little section here a lot smaller than they did on the SB3. You can see the differences there. This is probably something no one would ever really notice or even care about, but even the screws are different on the back of these controllers. For one thing, the screws are very deeply inset into the controller. You can't even see them on the SB3, but they're right at the surface when you're looking at the new Rev1. And there's also less of them. I mean, the Rev1 has 12 screws, the SB3 has 15. Who knows why? The front panel of these controllers is slightly different. Just like the rear, you see that the SB3 has a steep angle cutout, and they've kept the same thing going with the graphics. They made Serato bigger. The other thing they did away with, which is an odd little detail, again, that probably no one would really notice, is the graphic for the headphone is gone. It no longer says phones. They've used the universal headphone symbol right above the headphone jack. I really like that the Rev1 now has the headphone off to the side. As you can see with the SB3, they put the headphone jack squarely in the middle of this controller, so it had the headphone jack pointing out, and it may not be a place you want to get poked in during your gig. So having that off to the side is greatly appreciated. It also falls in line with what these controllers were meant to do. This is more of a mixing console where the headphones are in the middle. Doesn't really matter all that much where the headphone jack goes, but when you're in battle configuration, you definitely don't want anything in between your crossfader. You want it off to the side if you're using headphones at all in battle configuration. So it was a good attention to detail there again for them to move that, because that's definitely not something you need in the way. If you're doing body tricks, having that thing there is definitely going to be in your way. If you're lifting your hand up from the table, you're going to hit the middle of that before you hit the fader. So it's good that they put that there. Pioneer pretty much copied the layout of the Newmark Mixtrack Platinum Effects controller. Well, they've put the headphone volume here instead of a microphone input. I don't like that.
I don't like it. I don't
like that the volume is way off to the side. I get the thinking. A lot of battle DJs don't use headphones at all, so they put it out of the way. But as a pure mixing standpoint, I don't like that this is out of the way. I'm more of a mixer than a scratcher, and I always like having my headphone controls all next to each other. For the deck 3 and 4 buttons, on the SB3, they kind of mimicked what this would look like if it was a turntable. They put the center wheel in the middle of this rectangle here, and underneath where it says deck, that could stand in place of where the performance pads would be. So that was a cool little kind of Easter egg I think they put there, but they did away with that on the SB3 because this is no nonsense. This is for scratching. They put the button here off to the side, but it's kind of there with all the other buttons. I mean, only by tactile feel will you really know what this button is. I mean, it didn't really make a difference with this controller that this was separated into its own smooth area, differentiated by the top surface. They made it smooth in the deck 3-4 area. That doesn't matter here. I think for 99% of the DJs, that 3 and 4 is never really going to be useful. I think it's more of a marketing thing, you know, oh, you have 4 decks. Yeah, but will you use it really? The other thing with this controller, that it was something I didn't notice if I would even like or miss, is the actual surface texture. Now the texture that they have on the SB3 is kind of shiny. It has a little bit of shimmer to it. It looks more metallic when you're looking at it. If you really look at the top, there's these grooves that kind of make it look like it would be like an aluminum surface of a DJ controller. And they've done away with that on the Rev1. I really like the SB3's surface more than the surface of the Rev1. And that's surprising because that's not something I thought I would have missed. But maybe they thought it was more distracting because as I'm looking at it, light is way more reflective on the surface of the SB3 than it is on the Rev1. Another thing I see they did away with on the pitch control is they got rid of it saying tempo. It says tempo on the pitch control for the SB3. It does not tell you that at all on the Rev1. Again, this seems to be for more seasoned battle DJs that are used to this type of layout. If you're not a DJ that's familiar with this, you may not have any idea of what this is. But I guess here you're just supposed to know. If you know, you know. If you don't, then too bad, you suck, you lose the battle. Go home, kid. Get out of here, you bother me. The LED meters inside of the mixer section definitely feel smoother to me. I feel like they look smoother and brighter and clearer on the SB3 than they do the Rev1. Yeah, if you look at the VU meters, I mean, the same song is playing at the exact same time. I have both controllers plugged into the same laptop, so they're both controlling the same exact thing. So if you look at the volume, you'll see that the VU meters on the Rev1 are much dimmer than they are on here, which I find to be strange. Maybe it's because of this piece of acrylic glass that's over it. Maybe they've given, it kind of feels to me like they gave the same texture that they gave the surface. They put that texture on the lights and they're separated. Here you have this smooth surface between all of the LEDs. You can glide your finger across and it just feels like one smooth piece of plastic.
Just a piece of plastic.
But on here, you can actually feel each one of the individual cutouts for the LEDs. Depending on what you're looking to do with your controller will depend on which of these controllers you'll like more. If you're doing just mixing, I think that the SB and SX and all the familiar layout controllers are the way to go. But if you're someone who wants to get into battle type DJing, this is more the area you want to go because this is kind of the layout you're always going to have. That's pretty much it with the comparison between the two controllers. Now I'm going to be doing a tutorial of the Rev1 itself, and a friend of mine pointed out that I haven't done a review at all for the SB3. So I did start doing an unboxing video about a year or so ago when I got it, and I never made a video for it. So I'm probably going to do a tutorial for the SB3 and an unboxing, even though it's about a year and a half old. So I think I'm going to do that as well. Maybe, I'm unsure, but I think the popularity of the SB series warrants me making a video because not everyone is going to have the Rev1. So if you liked the video and found it useful, hit the like and subscribe button down below, and be sure to check off the notification box to be notified each and every time I do a video. And I really appreciate all the love and positivity I've been getting on this channel. I didn't think anyone would watch me do any of this at all, so for me to already have 250,000 views is just a huge thing. I can't even begin to express the amount of gratitude I have for everyone that takes the time out of their life to even watch a little nerdy, dorky kid do something like this on his little channel. But I really, really appreciate it. So thank you for watching, everybody. We'll see you in the next video. And now go out there, master, and make money.